I am the Chief Operating Officer for Condor Petroleum, which is based in Calgary, but we have a subsidiary company, Falcon Oil and Gas, that's based out of Activate. I enjoy traveling both to Kazakhstan and elsewhere. I welcome the opportunity to see other parts of the world and meet people that view the world through a set of glasses different than my own, and then have developed some very dear friends in far reaches of the world, including a number of friends here in Kazakhstan. I started to come to Kazakhstan in 2002 when I accepted assignment with Texaco North Bazachi. I stayed on with the project after Texaco or Chevron sold it, first to the Chinese and then to a partnership between CNPC and Nelson Resources. And then I left for a few years after Nelson Resources sold the project to Lukoil. And then I came back to Kazakhstan in 2009. In 2002, when I first came here, it was my first international experience, and at that point in time, had not traveled extensively outside the U.S. at all, and any traveling that I had done was limited to travel just in the Americas, if you will. And so this was really my first work international experience and first real opportunity to travel. Fortunately, with Chevron, they did as part of their program prior to sending you abroad. We did get a little bit of introductory training into some of the cultural differences and what to expect. So I did get a little bit of preparation, but not a lot. You know, some of the things in terms of what to expect. You know, both in terms of the infrastructure and what I would be exposed to, but more so the cultural aspects, and that was very helpful. We Americans, you know, we don't necessarily grow up with the most diverse cultural perspective. You know, we're not known for being culturally diverse, and in fact, many Americans, you know, don't travel beyond their homeland. And so getting some understanding prior to coming here about the culture and what to be prepared for, I think was very good on Chevron's part. When we talk about cultural differences, you know, there are a number of things that make up a cultural or cultural characteristics, and when we study cultures, you know, we're generalizing things, you know, and in essence, creating some biases, one culture versus another, you know, and absolutely each individual is an individual, but some of the differences that might exist, say, between the U.S. and Kazakhstan. For one, our history, my forefathers, at some point in our history, left their homeland and came to the New World and basically set out on their own, and you know, sought opportunities in the New World, and as such, we Americans tend to be very individualistic, and whereas Kazakhs, the folks in Kazakhstan, the history here, going way back in time, this has been a culture that the tribe or the group was more important than the individual, and if you didn't bond together as a tribe or a group, then your own survival was in danger. Going back clear to the times of Genghis Khan. And not to say one culture is right or one culture is wrong. They're just different, and so consequently, relationships, family, the greater family are much more important here in Kazakhstan than they would be in the U.S. That's not to say that they're not important in the U.S. They're just much more significant here. With that, some of the background in Kazakhstan, because of that, the Kazakh culture, it tends to be what we would call a hierarchical society, and so there is a lot more respect for people that are older or people that have a title, so there's a lot more respect for folks of that nature. Conversely, again, in the U.S., there's this underlying premise that all men are created equal, and although you in some way would respect your elders or in some way respect your boss, that only goes so far. So those are a couple differences. I think another difference deals with how we communicate. We Americans are known as direct communicators. If I see you on the street and I want to know what time it is, normally I'm just going to ask, what time is it? Olga, please tell me the time. If you're a good Kazakh, you're going to think that I'm rude because I didn't ask you how your family is or ask about yourself. Those indirect subtleties of communication are much more important in, say, the Kazakh culture. And so those of us that come here that are trying to work in this culture need to be aware of those differences and be respectful of them. In general, my experience, if it's just a group of Kazakhs, I think at times the Kazakhs as a whole can be very forgiving of us expats and realize that we make mistakes in the Kazakh culture and are a bit forgiving of that. I know that when I was with the North Bazachi project and we had a group of Kazakhs, a group of Chinese, and a group of Western expats, those cultural differences were very large, and some of the things a lot of the things that were very problematic were seemingly small things. Where one group would inadvertently offend another group, and then you'd have a big problem on your hand. So being aware of those cultural differences, I'd say, is very important. I'll be very generalized here. Not all expats that come to a foreign land to work, and this land in particular, many of them lose sight of the fact that they are guests in a foreign country, and they need to behave as guests, much like you would if you're going to a friend's house for dinner. You need to behave appropriately, and not all expats do that at times. The typical Kazakh Dostrahan, and sitting on the floor and then being the guest of honor and eating the eye of the animal that's being served was very different, as has been, say, drinking shubat. But those were very different, but it wasn't unexpected. I had been forewarned of those eating the eye of an animal, or eating the head of an animal, or drinking fermented camel's milk, or for that matter, eating horse meat, which I enjoy, is not something that we would do in the U.S. or Canada. When it comes to the communication, we assume that a lot of the communication is just a matter of translation, and really the translation is only a part of it, because of cultural differences. If I'm dealing with older Kazakhs, then not only do you have the language and the cultural issues, but many of the older generation in the oil business would be very set in the GOST way of doing business, and very resistive to with more Western standards, such as API and so forth. Not that one's right and one's wrong. It just they're different, and so those all present challenges. At one point in time, way back when, the U.S. and the Soviet Union would have been enemies, and so older gentlemen in the oil business, might be very, very set in the GOST standards, and an older Westerner may be very, very set in the API standards, and because of prejudices that both might have, that can set up communication barriers to prevent them from actually listening to one another and trying to learn from one another. I think the other challenge that I've seen as well, and it relates to age and hierarchy. I've seen a lot of instances. Our translators quite often are younger individuals, and expats not respecting the importance of age in this culture will at least attempt to put the translator in some very awkward situations where they're having to communicate some very abrasive messages to folks that are far older than them, which creates some discomfort for the translator, and oftentimes will create some communication problems as well. A couple pieces of advice, particularly for those that are considered it. It's a wonderful place to work. I don't regret at all being here since 2002. It's been both from a professional side and a personal side, quite an opportunity. It's and for anybody that's spent any time here, it's an opportunity to meet friends that will be friends for life, provided one is willing to open up their mind and not put blinders on based on preconceived prejudices. So, great place to work. And beyond that, in the past 12 years that I've been in and out of Kazakhstan, it's exciting to see all the changes that have occurred in this country, and I can only imagine what the future is going to bring here. Thank you.